as governor twice. And I'm just beginning to understand the implications of this all over again as we get around to New Hampshire, which is such a unique and remarkable place. That is asking a person for a vote when you get there. We're not there, so we have a lot of steps yet ahead. But asking someone for a vote is about the most humbling experience I've ever had. Because people look at you like you're looking at me. And they say, who is this person? What does he stand for? And do I actually want to use one of the most powerful rights that I have as an American citizen to support him? And that's what everyone over the next several months is going to have to go through. That very simple analysis of whether you've got somebody you want to vote for. Because they're going to come around, they're going to come through, and they're going to be asking that very simple question. And having done it before, I can tell you, for the person asking, it's pretty darn humbling. And I know it puts you on the spot, because you, as such a remarkable first-in-the-nation primary state, you've got to do your homework. And I know you do it. I mean, look how early it is, and people are, coming out and interested in politics. Well, who am I? The best way to know who I am is probably to look at some of the folks over here, and that's to start with the finest human being I've ever known in my entire life, Mary Kay, who was a Floridian. I don't hold that against her. I was born and raised in California. We got in Utah, where my family moved from Maryland, and her family moved from Florida, and we met in high school. And I laid eyes on her, and she was the most beautiful person I'd ever seen. I heard the southern accent, I thought, that's truly exotic. You don't get truly exotic, in the middle of a public high school in Salt Lake City, Utah. But it took years and years before I was able to win her over. Ran for class office to try to win her over. I lost. I found that she had run too. She lost. So we came together and consoled each other as losers. And I'll never forget what she said the day that we won election for governor. She turned to me and said, yeah, I really don't know what it means to be a winner. It's never quite happened that way. We got to know each other as well, working, as fate would have it, in a restaurant together. I mean, how cool is this? I'd see this, as I say it in the South, a yellow-haired girl in school who didn't pay me any attention. I wind up as a dishwasher in a restaurant in Marie Callender, Salt Lake City, Utah. And the salad girl who walks in is none other than K.K. Cooper, the prettiest salad girl I'd ever seen. So things evolved. I got a date. It worked out reasonably well. We have 7 kids. We had 5 on our own, and Liddy is one of them, representing those 5. Liddy, we're delighted to have you. Please behave yourself. That's all I ask. Gracie is our daughter who we adopted 11 years ago, a little over 11 years ago, from China. She just turned 12 2 days ago. She was abandoned at a vegetable market in a city called Yangzhou. Used to be the city where Marco Polo was the mayor for about 3 years during his life, right on the Yangtze River. Gracie has a remarkable story, and she's a reminder to me, and a reminder to Mary Kay, and a reminder to all of our kids about the importance and the dignity of life, wherever it exists. That someone who can wind up dumped in a vegetable market can go on to do such remarkable things in her life, and I'm just beginning to get a sense of what her life is going to be like. She has a younger daughter from India, who we adopted. I mean, as if, you needed more crazy things in your life after we were elected governor. We had a little more love to give. I don't know if any of you are adoptive parents, but when you have a little more love to give, it's like you've got to act on it, and we did. And this time, we brought a little girl from India. My old friend Ram over here, who we've chatted many times over the years about this, who now is in our home, 5 years old, a little daughter from India.
Sorry, you called it hurdle dog.
I'm sorry. It's our little She's so mad. You get to the end of the day, and you start going a little bit crazy. And then when I look at that's always the barometer. When I see Gracie starting to laugh, I know that I've said something. But we're honored to be here. Let me tell you where we are. Normal people and I hope you can relate to this, normal people don't wake up in the morning and say, I think it would be a good thing to run for president of the United States. And I turn to Mary Kay every morning, at 6 o'clock, is it? You know, the body alarm goes off, and I say, we're normal people. We're generally pretty sane. We want what's right for a country we love, and it's been great to my family. And we say, normal people don't do this. That's the logical side of your head speaking. And then you have the patriotic side of your head that says, our country is facing one of the most, perhaps the most serious inflection point in recent history. And if you're not willing, based upon your experiences in life, because the good Lord has given you some experiences, you've been able to serve overseas, you've been able to serve as governor, you've raised a great family, maybe you've learned a thing or two along the way. If you're not willing to step up and maybe expand the debate, which is a truly American thing to do, then what good are you? What kind of patriot are you? And when I sit in rooms, as I have the last couple of weeks, with big hitters, all of the people who kind of control politics, so they say, and they say, why would you want to do something like this? What do you have to offer? My response is typically, because none of you will. None of you will. I mean, tell me that somebody's going to be willing to stand up and do what needs to be done in the months and the years ahead. 7 kids, I know you all have them, everybody has something to drag along, dealing with the vicissitudes of a public life. We've been there. We've been elected twice. I can tell you, some people can take it, some people can't. It divides some families, it splits them up, it puts them to the, you know, the proverbial brink, because it's a pressure cooker. But here we stand, having spent 2 years in China, kicking the tires, having conversations, and reflecting upon what a remarkable country this is. 2 days ago, I guess it was yesterday, we stood in a home and had a traditional open house. And as we were surrounded by members of the media and citizens, I reflected a little bit on where we've been the last 2 years, where it's a closed environment. You don't get to speak out. You get security services following you around, as we know. And I stood right in the middle of the floor, and they just said, okay, time is yours. And you look around. Pretty intimidating experience, by the way. And you start to tell a little bit about where you are on things. The media are there. The citizens just drop by from the neighborhood, and they ask anything they want, and I say, this is America. This is uniquely an American process here that gets somebody to the finish line, that allows for an airing of the issues in ways that bring people ultimately to either support or reject you. And I thought that, you know, this is a remarkable process, and I'm grateful for that process. It reminds me what a unique country this is. Where are we? As I say, we're kicking the tires. We're looking at what lies ahead in terms of decision-making. And we'll probably be at a decision point, I would say, sometime in mid to late June. What is driving us? What is driving us is very simple. And I will put it in very simple terms, and that is $15 trillion. So unless you'd stop to look at $10 or $10 trillion to $15 trillion over the last 2.5 years, until you stop to look at the ramp up even before that, and until you stop to look at where the trajectory of our spending takes us and the impact it has on the dollar, and in turn what the dollar means to our livelihood and our standard of living and our ability to compete in the world, then you probably don't get the picture about or the importance of what debt is doing to this country. So you can't live 10,000 miles away in Beijing as we have for the last 2 years, serving our country. We've been grateful to do that. I've got to say some of the finest men and women we've associated with are those who call Embassy Beijing home. And they're in the military, and they're in the foreign service, and they're in the intelligence agencies, and they do a lot of work for this country that no one will ever know about. And they work hard, and they work patriotically, and they work diligently. And it was a great honor and privilege to be able to rub shoulders and call them colleagues. And all over the world we have people. They're deployed in lands where they're not always comfortable. They're deployed in lands that are dangerous, and they're doing our work. And as you reflect from 10,000 miles away from the country of China, which is the top of the heap now, let's face it, you know, all eyes are on China because their economy is moving so rapidly upward. They can do no wrong. 8, 9, 10% GDP growth rates, now and forever. The reality is a little bit different. They have challenges that, we could spend all night talking about that probably far exceed challenges that we face as a country. And then you reflect from Beijing on our country, as I've been able to do the last 2 years, and you get a sense that, it's just the opposite. There's this euphoria in China, this giddiness about where they've arrived and where they're going. And the mood over here is much different. We're in a funk. We are dispirited. It's all like our hope has been dashed. And then you think, okay, in my conversations with key groups in China who really do matter, like the dissidents, the people who want to expand freedom and liberty and promote human rights, they get inspired every time they see the American flag out front of the embassy when they come in to visit our people. Why? Because we stand for something as a country that still impacts and influences people overseas. And I meet with the business community over in China. You're building great businesses, there's a billionaire a day. It's moving at a very, very rapid clip. And where do they want to be when they grow up? They want to be here. They want to have businesses like ours. They want to have governance systems like ours. They want to have global reach like our companies do. And then I visit with university students in China. Where do they want to come? Where do they want to learn about the future? They want to do it here. And then I visit the creative class, the filmmakers, the poets, the musicians, the people who are poking through culturally. They're inspired by this country. I try to tell this to Southern New Hampshire University today in a commencement speech. It's okay to be down, but let's remember that we are still the country, whether you see it or not, that inspires the rest of the world. Which leads me to believe that we can pull our act together enough in this country to launch anything we want, so long as we're together. We can launch an industrial revolution if we want, which is the question that I think is going to be before people in this 2012 election cycle. How seriously do we take the debt issue? But just as importantly, how seriously do we take the revenue side of the balance sheet? Which is going to be, you got to grow your way out of it too. At some point, you got to have a growth strategy that allows for the engines of your economy to be refired and for you to earn your way out of it. We did this in the state of Utah with a lot of great folks. Our business community together put a 10-point plan in place in 2004. Cut taxes to historic rates. We reformed taxes. We looked at the overall regulatory environment. We did healthcare reform in ways that, the state got great recognition. There are great people in that state. They worked hard. They believe in entrepreneurship, and the results speak for themselves. #1 economy in the country, year after year. We had the best managed state in America, not thanks to the governor only. We had a lot of great people involved. Good legislature, too. And so here we sit, a little bit down, a little bit dejected, a little bit in a funk. And I'm here to tell you, if I don't do anything at all, this is simply my message. Because maybe we're out the door and never to be seen again. New Hampshire does that. New Hampshire does that, and they can run you through, and then you're never back. But just understand this. The view from 10,000 miles away is this is a pretty great country. And we have the ability, if we want, and it's got to be led by a plan that gets us from point A to point B, to launch an industrial revolution in this country like we have in the past, in ways that fire our engines of growth. To my mind, we don't have a choice. I'm talking about something that might sound like pie in the sky, but we don't have a choice. We've got the debt problem, and we've got the growth side. And if we don't begin to look at what the possibilities are for getting us out of it over the next couple of years, well, guess what? The China that's nipping at our heels, that's going to become as large as our economy in sheer size, which will happen inevitably, but it's their per capita numbers when they begin catching us on a per capita basis. And then India's right behind, by another 20 years. We either decide that we are going to be the preeminent leader of the 21st century, a century that is going to be highly competitive, by the way, a century in which other countries are figuring out how to move their economies forward, or we're going to stay flat. And if you choose to say, and this will be, I think, the discussion for the next election cycle. Here's the choice. You want a lost decade, which is a reality, just kind of moving along incrementally, ambling along at a slow growth rate and a high level of unemployment, or do we want to launch an industrial revolution? Reform our taxes, look at regulatory reform, take seriously the lowest of low-hanging fruit, which is energy. I mean, for every reason in this country, we ought to be taking seriously an energy policy that moves us more toward a transitional product like natural gas. We have it in such abundance. We can use it in manufacturing. We can use it in transportation. We can use it with our electrical and power needs as well. So I'm here to tell you more than anything else that I am truly excited as one now private citizen about what this country can do, not what it can't do, but what it can do. Because I've seen too many times living out of this country the power and majesty that we project. And when we come together and get our act together around a vision, what we can do as a country. And I think the time is right for us to take seriously the thought of an industrial revolution that fires up our engines of growth and gets us in a more productive direction. Now, all the blanks are going to be filled in during the course of whatever campaign there is, and we're going to have to decide as a family in the weeks to come what we do. All I can tell you in the meantime is it has been a great honor and privilege to hang around with some great people in the state. It has reaffirmed my belief, take it from me, living far away the last couple of years, that open house meetings aren't necessarily encouraged, where inviting the media in to comment on whatever they want, inviting opposition political parties to come in and do whatever they want. This is America. This is transparency at its very best. This is the way we do business here, and it's exciting. So win, lose, or draw, you all have reminded our little family that we still live in the greatest country in the history of the world. Thank you for having me very much. And I can take any questions, comments, criticism, input, whatever you have. Yes, sir. Give your name.
My name's James.
Hi, James.
Now, you mentioned something about the dollar being weak. In my opinion, the Federal Reserve was part of the market crash, and it's part of the reason that gasoline is way too high. What do you think about auditing the Federal Reserve, top to bottom?
Auditing the Federal Reserve top to bottom. Well, I can tell you something about the Federal Reserve because I've served on the bank board of the regional branch in San Francisco, so I know something about the Federal Reserve. It is looked at, the numbers are probed by outsiders, fairly regularly. I don't know about a full-blown audit. It's something to consider. But let me tell you what the infusion of capital is doing into our economy. When you talk about commodity prices, when you talk about commodity prices going up with the value of the dollar, it's having a real impact. And I think we need to make sure that there is some fine balance between the cost of capital and what it's going to cost us to carry the debt over the period ahead, because let's face it, debt repayment is going to be a huge issue, and what we pay for that debt is going to affect everyone here, as against what you're paying for commodities and value and the relative value of the dollar at a lower ebb. Our overall competitiveness, our ability to export. There's a lot wrapped up in the value of the dollar, which is in a sense tied to the level of liquidity, which is funneled into this country. I can't give you an answer on auditing the Fed, but I'll think about it, and I'll have a conversation next time with you. It might be yes, it might be no. But thanks for that question. What do you think you would find if you audited the Fed?
Well, I think that you would probably find that the currency is worth a lot less than it was 100 years ago, or even 5 years ago. And I want to find out what's going on because I'm paying too much for gas. I personally think the easy money policy during the 2000s had a lot to do with this crash. And, a lot more people are asking tougher questions about the Fed than they were this time 5 years ago.
I think there's something about gasoline real fast. We talk about the price of gasoline. And, I think we all ought to be aware of the reality of gas prices, oil prices. And when we're 60% reliant upon the importation of oil, it's not only an economic issue, it's a national security issue. And when people yell and scream about $4.50, $5 gas prices at the pump, let us remember that fully loaded for all taxpayers is a lot higher than that. Based on some estimates, it's $13 and $14 a gallon. If you want to take into account what we're paying for foreign deployments, you want to take into account the cost of keeping the sea lanes open for the free flow of product, the cost of transportation importing the product, on and on and on. When I made that comment earlier about, an energy policy that draws from some of our domestic needs, we've talked about this for 8 presidents now. Yet it's a low-hanging fruit, and increasingly we're finding more and more in the way of raw materials available here on the natural gas side. And guess what? With each passing year, we have the ability, thanks to innovation within businesses, to get it in a less invasive way and to bring it up in ways that protect the environment as well. So let's be realistic when we talk about gas prices. We might think they're high, but think again about how really high they are. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Governor, credibility is really an issue we have with all politicians these days. It's nice to know that a guy with a GED can come out and talk about coming up from behind and coming forward to continue to achieve the number of things you have. What is the biggest single problem that we have from a foreign standpoint, since that's your expertise at this point, to affect the United States?
The biggest problem we have
from a foreign relations standpoint, from a standpoint of our competitors in the world market.
I would say leading that list would have to be our dependence on foreign oil. I think that is crippling us. I think it's an issue also that we can resolve. I happen to think our trade imbalance with China is also a major issue for this country. And it's one that's likely to be worked out based upon the value of China's currency over time, which is likely to take on more and more of a market valuation. And as their currency gets closer to a market valuation, we're going to have a lot more in the way of export opportunities to China, which is going to be great for small businesses over time. So we complain about the illegal value of the Chinese currency, the renminbi, being 17% discounted. But the fact of the matter is that's likely to ameliorate itself over time. And then the question will be ours. And that is, do small businesses, do medium-sized businesses in this country know enough about the markets that can be penetrated for their export opportunities for us to really be able to generate and create a lot more jobs on the export front? So I see the imbalance both as a challenge today, but an opportunity tomorrow. Third, I would also have to say that in some cases, our deployments abroad need to be reviewed and are having an impact on the way in which the world sees us.
So how do we get out of Afghanistan?
Well, that's got to be a choice that a leader makes. On a timeline that a leader feels is in the national interest. If we want to spend another $250 billion in Afghanistan, in search of what? I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but describe for me a winning exit strategy. Describe for me how the region is going to be any more stable or secure when the United States is gone.
Well, I'm a guy who was 2/3 of Vietnam and didn't see any good come out of that, except we built an infrastructure. I stood up standing in front of the TV, since my son was in ABC at the time, when Bush went into Iraq. The same thing for Afghanistan. I don't think we understand the true value of our troops when deploying properly. For me, I'd get out of Afghanistan tomorrow by saying, we're leaving.
Let's have that conversation. You say your son's a Navy SEAL?
Mm-hmm. Class 182.
Class 182. Well, that's my son's dream, which is beginning his career in the Navy.
He may want to talk to Kirk.
Well, let's get them together sometime. And thank you for your service. Were you in the Navy as well?
No, Army. Corps of Engineers.
Thanks for your service. Greatly appreciate it. Those are the three big ones to me that, from an international policy standpoint, need to be fine-tuned. The list goes on, though. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Chris. I'm here with my son Jordan. A quick comment before my question. We lived in the most populated Muslim country in the world for several years. And your comments on China about businessmen college students, artists wanting to come to the U.S., we found the exact same thing in Indonesia. People really look up to the United States. My question is just your thoughts on border control.
You know, as a governor of a gateway state, not a border state, but a gateway state, and someone who's looked at every possible policy option that we can take on the border, I don't think we have a choice. I think we need to secure the border, and that is a fence, it's technology. I hate the thought of a fence on the border. I mean, for me, as an American, the thought of a fence, to some extent repulses me, because it's not consistent with our overall, the image that we've projected from our very beginning to the rest of the world. But the situation today is such that I don't think we have a choice. And before we begin the conversation about processing 11 or 12 million undocumented workers, we've got to secure the border. I've been down to the border with our Utah National Guard troops when they were sent down a few years ago. And what was interesting to me was the gaps, the wide open gaps in areas that were relatively populated. You would expect to see a fence, you would expect to see something, but there's nothing at all. And these great National Guard troopers were putting up lights, and they were putting up sensing devices, and they were putting in a road where people could, at least on our side of the border, have greater access to people coming across. But I think first and foremost, we've got to deal with the border. And I think that means we need the 4 border governors who basically are able to check. They're closest to it. They ought to be able to verify whether or not their border has been secured. And when they can verify, as governors of those border states, that their borders are secure, then I think we'll be okay. And then we have to move forward with some sort of program that begins to process people who today are waiting 11 years for citizenship, roughly, as opposed to the year and a half when I lived in Southeast Asia 20 years ago, and we were getting Vietnamese refugees through our embassy in Singapore. Much different lay of the land. 9/11 changed everything. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, as a parent with 7 children, I imagine you all spend some time thinking about education in your house. So I'd ask you, what are your perspectives on the state of public education in this country, and what thoughts do you have on making it better?
I love teachers, and Robert Gerke, a reporter here from the Salt Lake Tribune, will know that, because we did a lot for our teachers in Utah. After we got our budget up, the economy was going, we had a good surplus. One of the first things we did was actually try to begin paying teachers what they're worth, because I fundamentally believe that a teacher in the life of a child can have more impact than almost anybody else other than parents. They motivate, they stimulate, they inspire, and I think that's a premise I start with right off the bat. I love people who want to be teachers. My grandfather was a teacher in public schools in Utah and then Idaho, and he always told his boys, if you want to reach the top step in life, you become not a teacher, an educator. That's what he called it. But not everybody's going to make the cut, and so you're going to have to prepare for something else. If you can't cut it as a teacher, you can always go into business. And my dad didn't cut it as a teacher, and he went into business. And I got the same darn lecture from my dad, you got to go into business. It is where all the action is, and you can impact and influence the world. But if you can't make it in business, you can need a fallback position in life. You can always go into politics. So I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to be telling my own kids. Let me just tell you beyond that, I think the most important thing we can realize in the whole education debate is that our kids learn differently. Every child walking into the classroom has a different temperament, a different attitude toward learning, and you know what? A different genius. We tend to measure everyone based upon the same recognition of genius as opposed to the several geniuses that kids have, and sometimes they're not recognized at all during the course of their lives. And so I look at Gracie's classes, I look at little Asha, our 5-year-old daughter, and I say, they're so different. They view the world so differently, yet we don't want to put them in a classroom that's going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. And so what about greater options and greater choices in charter schools, where we can actually have programs that focus on what kids naturally gravitate to and what they do well? Some are going to be musicians, some are going to be mathematicians, and some are going to be great social scientists, whatever they want to be. I think we should recognize the importance of having choices in our educational system. Finally, let me just say that I'm a real believer in the idea that by age 6, I think kids really have learned a lot about their, or at least assimilated a lot of their approach to learning and reading and mathematics. And you get much beyond that, and it becomes increasingly difficult to change their trajectory as a student. So I think the more that we focus at home and in schools on the very critical years leading up to 6, you know, I think by 6, the mind, you don't need the philosopher Piaget, you know, to convince you of this. The mind has formed in ways that really do, I think, make or break the student. So the early childhood development, I think, is a very, very important step as well. May I just say finally that I don't mean to go on and on like this, but I like our schools and what they're all trying to do. You know, I think preparing students for the world they're stepping out into is important. Recognizing the world for what it is. And I think that, in part, is done by the languages that they study. You know, I studied Spanish. I'm a Chinese speaker. I studied Mandarin and Cantonese. And I look at a lot of our school programs, and they're studying French, which is a great language. Studying German, which is a great language, but probably not as 21st century relevant as some other languages. And I think to the extent that we can focus our kids in terms of opening their eyes to what world they're stepping out into by offering 21st century language is a good thing. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Governor, my name is Walter Freeman. I'd like to ask a question. I'd like to know, Governor, if you're a supporter of core conservative values like smaller government, lower taxes, individual responsibility, actually running our government by the Constitution. What's your position on some of those issues?
Well, my mantra, you know, was and is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I don't think it needs to be any more complicated than that. Constitutional government, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All I would ask is look at what I've done. I'm not going to run and try to hide from what I've done. Some things you might like, some things you might not like. But I think you'll find that on the tax side, you'll like what you see. On the governance side, you'll like what you see. I don't think we would have, in the great state of Utah, been cited as the best managed state in America unless we got that proper balance. But just take a look at what we've done, and I think it will be completely consistent with the values that you're talking about that are tied to our Constitution. Yes, sir.
Governor, welcome to New Hampshire.
Thank you.
My name is Claude Tell, and 2 points that you brought up, one was on the debt and one was on tax reform. Could you elaborate a little as to, 1, how you handle the debt issue, and 2, how you would work with tax reform?
Sure, thank you. On the debt side, and these are big and complicated issues, but let me try to narrow them down and put them into some focus. On the debt side, you know, we're sitting with $14 trillion in debt. Nationwide, we're looking at $51, $52 trillion. So you look at private and public debt. I mean, so we've got the government debt, and then you look at all public and private debt. That's about every home, every small business, every large business, every city, every state. Everyone is going through this very painful deleveraging process, which is, I think, a fancy Wall Street word. And it's tough, and it's painful, and it's going to continue to play out. The question will be, does it play out over the next 10 or 20 years, in which case our economy will probably be slack, or does it play out in a faster way? And I do believe that Paul Ryan has come up with some solutions. He hasn't addressed Social Security, but he's trying to address some of the other aspects of the debt that I think are quite good and valid. And among them would be tying in the rate of GDP, the percentage of GDP that would be dedicated to government services. Today, 23%. I think 19 to 20% is what most people would say if you want to get around to a balanced budget situation sooner rather than later. And I would say beyond that the balanced budget amendment is something that really needs a serious vetting and discussion on Capitol Hill. Every governor has a balanced budget amendment. Every governor has to submit a budget that is in balance or is thrown in the garbage can. and why we can't do that as a nation. Why we can't get around to at least preparing for that eventuality is beyond me.
How long would that take, do you think, before realistically you could have a balanced budget?
Well, you'd have to do the math. You'd have to just do the economics and take, the largest chunks of government spending, just the 2/3 that is on the entitlement side. Just take a look at Medicare and Social Security. Medicaid, I think Paul Ryan is again right in block grants to the states. They increasingly should be in charge of their own destiny in determining what the percentage of poverty is and populations that will be covered. And then a lot of it would have to do with the defense budget. Some people are saying, don't touch the defense budget. And, defense folks, my sons are going there. If you can't find something in the defense budget that is an overrun, that is a procurement problem, that is something that you can cut, I don't know that you're looking closely enough. And I think that probably will be a broader debate about the kind of conflicts we're fighting these days. Asymmetrical threats require an asymmetrical presence on the defense side. And we don't have an asymmetrical presence. It means more in the way of rapidly deployable special forces when you're fighting an asymmetrical threat. You're not fighting a nation state. You're fighting a franchise of the bad guys, of jihadists who are in dozens of places around the world. So I think, the defense budget, I think, is largely going to be influenced by how we deem the threat to be going forward.
And on the tax reform side, what suggestions do you have in terms of tax reform?
On the tax reform side, what we did in Utah was a revenue neutral effort to flatten and simplify the tax code. So we took about 30% out of the income tax and lowered it, flattened it, simplified it. And I do believe that nationally there is an appetite for that, but also on the corporate tax side. I think both the corporate tax and the income tax need to be seriously looked at. If we're going to stimulate things, if we're going to really embark upon what we think can be an industrial revolution, what is the one thing that really does stimulate the creation of capital, as opposed to scare it away? It's your tax policy. And so if capital is fleeing from our marketplace and it's parking itself somewhere else, then there should be evidence that we need to do a little bit of tinkering. We need to lower the rates, probably both on the corporate side and the individual side.
Would you deal with deductions also? I mean, you have a company like GE that, how much do they make in profit and pay zero income?
I've heard the numbers, I can't remember exactly. But in order to get to that lower rate on a revenue neutral basis, how do you pay for it? You got to pay for it by taking the deductions out of the system, which we endeavored to do. We didn't get all of them. In some cases, the lobbies are so strong, and the political army that is assembled against you is so formidable that you can't get it done, but you got to a pretty good start. And I think if you want to make it work, you're going to have to take, I think, a pretty solid line on deductions and dealing with those deductions. If you want what really is a meaningful flat tax.
Okay.
Thank you all very much for being here.